That's protected. That's the First Amendment. But when the government speaks, it's not protected. Government speech is not free speech. In fact, if you read the First Amendment, the 5 freedoms that are given in there, not given, but acknowledged, because our government doesn't give us the freedoms. Those 5 freedoms, religion, speech, press, assembly, and to petition the government, are collectively known as the freedoms of conscience. Before any of those 5 are given, there's a non-freedom that's spelled out in the First Amendment. The very first words of the very First Amendment to the Bill of Rights is not a freedom at all. It says, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion. And then it goes on to say, or prohibiting the free exercise thereof and the freedom. So before there's any freedoms given to or acknowledged for us people, there's a non-freedom, a restriction, a hand-tying of the government. When the government speaks, the government must be neutral. The government cannot promote or do anything respecting an establishment of religion. And notice it said Congress shall make no law. Well, later that, of course, was applied to all the states, not just Congress. By the 14th Amendment and due process and that, our government at every level, from the White House to the Congress to the dog catcher, We even had to complain over a guy who was, what was he? He was the sewer guy or something, who was using his office to promote religion. Even at that level, he's representing the government. So Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion. That's been known as the Establishment Clause. The Establishment Clause is what our group works with in our lawsuits and our complaints. After the Establishment Clause is called the Free Exercise Clause. So they're different sides of the same coin. The government has to fold its arms and be neutral so that the people can be free. So if the president wants to go to church and talk about Jesus as an individual, that's great. But if the president gets up and says, as an official U.S. act by Congress, I am now calling on all Americans to pray, that's not the president speaking, that's the government speech. That's the government speaking. So Andy Laurie was thinking, well, how can we go after this sheriff who's doing this, and these mayors over here, and these governors over here? That was a congressional law. And the First Amendment says, Congress shall make no law. But Congress made a law respecting an establishment of religion. So we sued. We sued the White House. George Bush was in office at the time, and we named Bush. But then we had to switch. You can't sue Congress. But this time we didn't sue as taxpayers like we had in the Hine decision when we were suing under the faith-based initiative. Because since the Hine decision in 2007, in which we lost standing, the bar to getting into court has been raised. It's really harder to get into court now. And those of you who are watching constitutional law will see this. Now, we used to sail into court all the time. A question of standing was never even a question, but now everybody realizes, oh, the way to get away with violating the Constitution is just to make sure they can't get into court. So we did not sue as taxpayers, saying that, because there was no appropriation. Congress didn't set aside money to go for something. It was just a statute requiring the president to do this proclamation. So we sued under just direct injury. That proclamation is aimed at all Americans. Aren't we Americans? The intended audience of that proclamation is all Americans. It's you. It's all of us, right? And so, in fact, Annie Laurie's dad was one of the plaintiffs as well. And we named individual people and the Freedom from Religion Foundation. You can sue as an organization representing your members. So any of you here who are FFR members are plaintiffs in this case as well. So we sued in federal court in Wisconsin, and originally we named Shirley Dobson, and boy was she mad. She didn't even want to come down and get the papers. We named her because, and in a sense we were wrong to do this, but in another sense we were right to do this because it gave the court something. It gave the court something to take away from us. Because it had the appearance of a hand in glove. Here's a governmental function being orchestrated and run by a private religious group. So that's entanglement. One of the tests for constitutionality under the Establishment Clause is whether religion and government are being entangled together. What business does the government have surrendering part of its official function to this private group? Well, the judge threw out that part of it. Judge Barbara Crabb removed Shirley Dobson as a defendant in the case, and boy, were they happy. Yeah, see, we're winning this thing. And we went, and Annie Laurie was deposed, and it was horrible. She said the government came in, and it was like sitting under a bright light with a video camera, and trying to get her to trip up or something, and asking her all these questions like, well, there's a Columbus Day, right? You might object to what Columbus did to the Native Americans, right? But just because you feel bad about it, and you feel, would you object to that? And Annie Laurie said, well, Columbus was a real person. She was good about it. And we kind of think that Judge Crabb listened to some of those things that she said during the deposition about why does she feel injured? Why do we feel? Is it just because your feelings are hurt? Because it's somebody else's religion? Is having hurt feelings enough? Can't you just ignore it? I mean, what's the big deal, right? The president's up there calling all Americans free. Well, just don't pay attention, right? Of course, we make the argument, well, if the president was up there saying, I call on all Americans to curse God for how he destroyed with the tornadoes, would people ignore that? A National Day of Cursing God? People would say, wait a minute. Or if the president got up and said, we're going to have a month of fasting for Ramadan. You can ignore it, really. It's official government proclamation, but if you don't like it, just look the other way. Don't pay attention. So we get that all the time. What injury do you have? Oh, your feelings. You poor atheist, your feelings. Well, it wasn't just atheists. We were joined by believers as well, who agree with us that the government should not be orchestrating a private religious exercise. Something like prayer, which is quintessentially a religious exercise. What are you praying to, And couple that with the legislative history of that law, which is clearly evangelical Christian. Couple that with...
With God.
You missed. I think his eyesight's getting bad, so... after all these years. How many years old is he? Yeah, he's 6,000 years old, yeah. Well, incarnate or something, he was only 2,000 years old. But, so where was I before I was losing interrupted? So anyway, we sued, and boy, the religious right didn't like that. The fact that Congress passed this law, the fact that the religious right really made the law happen, and the fact that since that time it's been orchestrated by the evangelical Christian right. In fact, we produced a lot of evidence which helped the judge make her decision that it was divisive, because that National Day of Prayer is kind of owned by evangelical Christians. Non-evangelical Christians were frozen out of a lot of the events. Jews were not invited to the event. If you weren't the right kind of Christian, you couldn't participate in a lot of these events on the steps of the Capitol. It's like they think it's their thing. It's not for all Americans. It's for them. It's like they're like these territorial animals. You know how they mark off their boundaries, They have to go, we're gonna have to, why can't they just pray in their homes, right? Like Jesus said, don't be like the hypocrites, but get up and pray, but pray quietly in your closet. Don't let your right hand know what your left hand is. No, they want to get up and say, the mayor's office, and the sheriff's office, and the governor's office, and we produced a lot of evidence of the divisiveness, the religious divisiveness that this National Day of Prayer has had. So last year, in 2010, on April the 15th, which by the way was tax day, and by the way, it was the day that the Tea Party had a big rally on the steps, no, on tax day, they had a big rally there on the steps of our Capitol. Judge Crabb issued a decision in our favor, declaring that the National Day of Prayer is unconstitutional. And it was an amazing... But that's not the end of the story. As you know. Boy, we were dancing around the office, and it was like, yes, yes. And so that following first Thursday in May, which was just, 2 or 3 weeks later, the National Day of Prayer proclamation still happened because the judge said that the president is enjoined from doing this pending all the final appeals. So as long as it's not fully decided, he can still do it. Well, within 2 hours of that April 15th announcement that the judge ruled in our favor, within 2 hours of that, the White House sent out a tweet assuring everybody, by the way, we're still going to pray this year. I doubt that anybody in the White House had any time to read that decision, or even listen to or read her logic, or look at her reasoning. It's a wonderfully crafted decision. In fact, a lot of law schools are using that decision, and so even some high school classes are reading her decision about state-church separation. She disagrees with us on a lot of things. Judge Crabb, in her decision, says she thinks it's okay to have under God in the Pledge of Allegiance. We disagree with that, but she says she thinks it's just an acknowledgement. She thinks in God we trust on the money is okay. There's a lot of things that she thinks are permissible. But she thinks that this particular case crosses the line. It crosses from just a permissible acknowledgement or accommodation. It crosses that line and becomes an active promotion. It becomes a Congress passing a law respecting an establishment of religion. It's pushing pro-religion. And she used a lot of wording about how, what's to keep the president from getting up and saying we should all spend some time in a sweat lodge, inhaling the sweetgrass smoke, or whatever, if he were to pick a particular religion, and it was a delicious decision to read. A couple days later, the White House announced that they would appeal. And so immediately we knew, okay, they're going to appeal to the 7th Circuit. We were in the 7th Circuit, and that's in Chicago. So we went into the appeals mode then. And for a whole year, we had a good victory. In December, we went, all the briefs were filed. In fact, we were joined by Americans United for Separation of Church and State. They wrote a wonderful amicus brief for us. The ACLU, CFI wrote a brief, American Humanists. All the groups that care about these things got together and wrote friend of the court briefs, which if the court accepts them, they're entered as part of the argument for the case. I forget the exact name of the group. The Jewish Joint Committee on Religious Liberty, is that the name of the group? They wrote a great brief. So did the Baptist Joint Committee on Religious Liberty, because there's a lot of Christians who are really good on same-church separation. It's amazing. They're firm in their beliefs, but they don't think government should be helping them. They agree with us that we Americans are free to disagree with each other. We can have our arguments. We're free to disagree. We're free to fight about these things. But one thing we are not free to do is ask the government to settle the argument. The government has to back off and be neutral and say, hey, you guys, talk among yourselves. We're not going to take a position. So Judge Crabb said that National Day of Prayer Proclamation crosses the line. The National Day of Prayer Proclamation is the government taking an official government position on prayer, where millions of us don't believe in prayer. Millions of us think that prayer is even counterproductive and even dangerous. And there are cases where people have died because of prayer. In fact, not too long after that case was filed, there was a young girl in central Wisconsin, Kara Newman, who died on Easter Sunday from an easily treatable diabetes because her parents refused to take her to the doctor. They opened the Bible to James where it says, the prayer of faith will heal the sick. Prayer will heal the sick. And Jesus said, whatsoever you shall ask in prayer, believing, you shall receive. Those parents believed in prayer. They believed the Bible. They prayed for their daughter, and she died a horrible death because of that book and because of prayer. The parents were convicted, by the way, which was rare. The sentence was life, but they were still convicted of being parties to the death of their own daughter. That girl would be alive today if it weren't for prayer. So millions of us think, and I think probably most people in this room think that not only prayer a waste of time, it can be dangerous and counterproductive. And yet our president is getting up telling everybody, let's all Americans can pray. To his credit, Obama didn't do what Bush did. When Bush was president, he invited Shirley Dobson and the National Day of Prayer Task Force into the White House and had these big rallies and prayer times, and they all became like these stars because they got to be in the White House, and it was really a big evangelical thing. And George Bush used the exact wording from the National Day of Prayer Task Force, used the same scripture verses, and used the